American soldiers slept in foxholes through European winters, so brutal they killed more men than enemy bullets. During the Battle of the Bulge alone, over 15,000 American troops became cold-weather casualties, more than died from German gunfire. But entire units stayed alive till morning without heated barracks, modern gear, or even proper shelter. Their survival came down to 7 battlefield methods that most people today would not even think were possible. Strategic positioning. It starts with where and how they dug in before the cold even hit. Picking the right spot to dig a foxhole was literally a life-or-death decision that American forces mastered through months of deadly trial and error in places like the Ardennes forest and the frozen fields around Bastogne. Position was not just tactical. It was everything when temperatures dropped to -20 degrees Fahrenheit and could kill unprepared soldiers in a single night. Wind-shielded positions became the gold standard for winter fighting positions. Tree lines and ridge faces acted like massive natural windbreaks, cutting down brutal gusts that could turn any dugout into a freezing tomb. These natural barriers created calm pockets where temperatures stayed several degrees warmer than exposed areas just yards away. Choosing a fighting position was like real estate hunting, where the wrong neighborhood did not just mean bad views. It meant your squad turning into frozen casualties. Hills and reverse slopes provided similar protection, while offering tactical advantages. Stone walls and building ruins absorbed heat during brief sunny winter days and released that warmth slowly throughout brutal nights. Valley positions offered some protection from the worst weather while maintaining fields of fire. Water sources had to be within crawling distance because melting snow over tiny fires all winter wasted precious fuel and gave away positions. Supply routes needed to stay accessible, but also had to avoid becoming killing zones for German snipers. They needed positions with all the tactical advantages, cover, concealment, and warmth, except their version of military engineering involved avoiding becoming frozen targets for enemy artillery. Fuel availability was absolutely non-negotiable. Running out of heating materials during a winter offensive meant certain death. Positions had to offer enough scrap wood, paper, and burnable debris to last through extended periods when resupply was impossible. Snow-covered areas were not avoided. They were compacted and shaped into insulating barriers that prevented deeper ground freezing while creating windbreaks around fighting positions. Low-lying areas could become deadly frost traps where temperatures dropped even lower than surrounding terrain. They turned snow into armor against the cold. While most people today cannot even figure out how to properly program a smart thermostat, even being 10 feet higher on a slope could mean the difference between survival and becoming a frozen casualty. But finding the perfect position was only the beginning. Creating safe heating sources in combat zones required engineering skills that turned dangerous flames into life-saving heat without attracting enemy fire. Covert heating systems. The foxhole heater was not just a campfire moved underground. It was a carefully designed heating system that provided warmth without creating smoke signals for German artillery spotters who could call in devastating 88mm rounds on any visible position. The heating setup, positioned in corners, created optimal heat distribution throughout the entire dugout while minimizing light signatures that could draw sniper fire from as far as 800 yards away. The fire pit stayed small and deep, which prevented heat from escaping while promoting airflow that made primitive ventilation systems work. Building fires in a combat zone was like trying to cook dinner while hiding from people with scopes and mortars, except somehow they figured out how to do it without becoming targets. Smokeless fuel became an obsession because any visible smoke meant incoming artillery within minutes. Dry paper, cloth scraps, and processed wood burned cleaner than green branches or wet materials that created telltale smoke columns. Small metal containers like ration cans were turned into miniature stoves that concentrated heat while controlling emissions. Ventilation systems used empty ammunition boxes and debris to create draft systems that fed oxygen to fires without turning dugouts into smoke chambers. These improvised vents brought in outside air while rising heat created suction that pulled combustion gases away from sleeping areas. They invented covert central heating, using nothing but scraps and military ingenuity. While most of us struggle with gas grills that come with actual instruction manuals, only completely dry fuel could be used because anything that smoked would bring down German artillery that would turn your position into a crater. Fire management required constant attention from designated fire guards who understood that staying warm meant staying alive, but visible flames meant staying dead. The heating had to provide adequate warmth without creating light that could be seen by enemy observers hundreds of yards away. Soldiers took shifts monitoring flames throughout the night, ensuring combustion remained controlled and ventilation stayed balanced. Being the fire guard was like being a human thermostat that never got to sleep, except instead of adjusting wall controls, you were literally keeping your unit from freezing or getting shelled. The heating provided warmth from above, but the ground below was a different enemy entirely. Ground insulation systems were the foundation of surviving freezing nights because even the best heaters could not overcome deadly cold that seeped up from frozen earth below foxholes. Ground insulation. American military bedding was not just comfort, it was thermal engineering that created barriers between sleeping bodies and ground that could drop to bone-chilling temperatures of -10 degrees Fahrenheit, even several feet below the surface. Medical reports from the 101st Airborne showed that soldiers who slept directly on frozen ground had a 60% higher rate of cold injuries than those who used proper insulation systems. Thick padding materials formed the base layer that blocked ground chill that could kill sleeping soldiers even inside heated dugouts. Newspaper and cardboard were hoarded and layered deep, creating air pockets that worked like natural insulation. Dry clothing got packed into thick layers that trapped warm air while staying dry throughout winter campaigns. Building beds from battlefield debris was like assembling furniture from a military surplus catalog, except instead of confusing diagrams, you had survival instincts, and the alternative was freezing to death in a foxhole. Wool blankets and captured German gear went on top in arrangements that maximized warmth. The blankets were positioned to trap body heat while providing wind protection from drafts. Different materials had different properties. Some managed moisture, while others excelled at heat retention. Some units perfected raised bed platforms as alternatives to ground-level sleeping. These platforms were created using ammunition boxes, wooden planks, and debris that lifted sleeping areas above the frozen ground. The air gap between platform and earth could hold trapped warm air while preventing direct contact with frozen soil. They invented military heated mattresses using scrap wood and American ingenuity, which sounds primitive until you realize it worked better than most modern camping gear. Bedding shapes were formed into rectangular depressions that cradled sleeping bodies while trapping warm air in protective pockets around multiple soldiers. These shared sleeping areas worked with human body shapes to maximize heat retention while building unit cohesion. Multiple squad members often shared sleeping areas in arrangements that multiplied the insulation system's effectiveness. Larger soldiers with higher body heat output were positioned to warm the sleeping space for smaller soldiers who needed extra heat. Squad sleeping arrangements were strategic heat distribution systems, disguised as military necessity, because sometimes survival looks a lot like mandatory cuddles with your battle buddies. Daily maintenance kept materials working effectively. Padding had to be dried, moisture managed, and blankets reorganized regularly to prevent ice buildup that would destroy insulation properties. Yet even the most perfectly engineered bedding system was useless without understanding how to manage the heat source that mattered most, the human body itself. Body heat management, strategic body heat management, and military clothing systems turned the human body into an efficient heating unit that could generate and maintain warmth throughout brutal combat nights, where temperatures regularly hit -15 degrees Fahrenheit. This was not just about wearing more gear, it was about understanding how military physiology worked and maximizing internal heat production while preventing heat loss that could lead to frostbite casualties within 30 minutes of exposure. Pre-sleep activity periods were carefully timed to raise internal body temperature without causing sweat that would make sleeping dangerous. Light exercises and specific tasks like equipment maintenance were designed to pump blood and generate internal heat that would carry over into rest periods. They had bedtime calisthenics designed to generate internal heat rather than muscle building because the goal was staying warm enough to fight tomorrow, not winning fitness competitions. Clothing layers remained on throughout the night in strategic arrangements that provided insulation while allowing temperature regulation when conditions changed. The idea that soldiers had to strip down to sleep was not just wrong, it was potentially deadly. In winter combat conditions, where temperatures could drop without warning, base layers made from military wool stayed closest to the skin to manage moisture while providing insulation that worked even when wet. Middle layers provided the primary thermal barrier, using field jackets and extra shirts that trapped air while blocking wind that could penetrate dugout walls. Outer layers retained heat while providing protection from external cold that could seep through improvised shelter systems. Getting dressed for sleep involved more layers than an Arctic expedition, except instead of looking professional, the goal was not becoming a hypothermia casualty. Extremity protection received special attention because hands and feet developed frostbite faster than any other body parts, creating soldiers who could not pull triggers or march when ordered. Specialized techniques using extra socks and gloves created insulated coverings that trapped air around fingers and toes. The buddy system was essential for maintaining heat in critical areas. Soldiers paired up to check each other's extremities for frostbite signs, while sharing body heat during the coldest periods. Hands were tucked inside field jackets or shared between clothing layers, where body heat was concentrated. Feet were wrapped in extra blankets or placed against warming areas where heat from small fires could reach them. Sweat management during daytime operations directly affected nighttime survival because damp clothing against skin during freezing nights could lead to hypothermia, even inside heated positions. They had to regulate their combat activity to avoid excessive sweating, which is basically the opposite of every modern military training program that encourages maximum physical output. Clothing and body heat were crucial, but when temperatures dropped to truly deadly levels during major winter offensives, survival required taking protection to an extreme level. Extreme protection modes. Natural skin protection using available materials created additional thermal barriers that worked at the skin level where regular military clothing could not provide complete coverage. These were scientifically sound protection methods that created wind-resistant, heat-retaining barriers on exposed skin areas most vulnerable to frostbite during winter combat operations. Petroleum jelly was the premium choice for skin treatment when available because of its thick consistency and long-lasting protective properties. This medical supply created a waterproof coating that blocked wind while trapping a thin layer of warm air directly against skin surface. They invented military cold weather skincare using medical supplies, which sounds basic until you realize it probably worked better than most modern outdoor gear. Different available materials had specific properties depending on what supply lines could deliver. Soap was used for its moisture-blocking capabilities and reasonable protection duration. Cooking grease from rations was thicker and worked well for extended protection periods. Medical ointments were gentler and worked well for facial areas around eyes and nose where frostbite developed fastest. Weapon cleaning oil created a secondary protective layer that enhanced other coatings. The oil formed a barrier that blocked wind while actually retaining heat absorbed from body warmth, creating a warming effect that lasted for hours throughout guard duty shifts. Military oil became protective face paint that could save your life and keep you combat ready. Basically, the world's first functional war paint with actual survival benefits. Specific types of available oils created coatings with better protective properties depending on what supply sergeants could scrounge. Motor oil was preferred when available because it created longer-lasting coverage that adhered better to skin and provided more consistent protection. Oil preparation involved mixing different viscosities to create consistency that stayed in place better than thin oils alone. This mixture created a protective coating that was both wind-resistant and heat-retaining, while not interfering with weapon operation or combat effectiveness. Cloth wraps took the protection system further by targeting pulse points where major blood vessels were closest to the skin surface. These specially prepared wraps were positioned around wrists, necks, and ankles, where heat loss was most rapid and dangerous during extended winter operations. Fabric wraps treated with oils were like heated accessories for your circulatory system. Military gear that could literally keep your blood flowing when temperatures dropped below survival thresholds. These protection methods worked well for healthy soldiers in good condition, but some unit members faced challenges that required an entirely different level of care and medical attention. Care for compromised soldiers. Specialized survival strategies for wounded and exhausted soldiers required understanding the physiological differences that made these individuals more vulnerable to cold-related casualties. Army medical data showed that wounded soldiers developed hypothermia 3 times faster than healthy troops, and soldiers who had been awake for over 48 hours had virtually no cold resistance left in their bodies. Premium positioning within shared shelters was the foundation of protecting compromised personnel. Wounded soldiers and exhausted personnel received spots closest to heat sources or in center areas where temperature distribution was most consistent. This positioning was military medical mathematics based on their reduced ability to generate internal heat. Casualties and exhausted soldiers got the premium real estate in the survival game, closest to heat sources and wrapped in enough gear to make an Arctic explorer feel under-equipped. The extra layering system was extensive and systematic. While healthy soldiers might survive with standard field equipment, compromised personnel were wrapped in multiple layers of blankets, captured enemy gear, and any available insulation materials. Healthy unit members formed protective sleeping arrangements that created human heat barriers around individuals who could not maintain their own body temperature. They positioned themselves to block cold air currents while directing their own body heat toward wounded soldiers who needed additional warmth to avoid becoming fatal casualties. Squad members became human space heaters, powered by body heat and unit loyalty, the original renewable energy source that kept combat units effective. Heated materials became essential tools for providing targeted warmth to individuals who could not generate enough internal heat through normal military activity. Metal containers heated by small fires throughout duty periods were carefully wrapped before being placed near feet, backs, or stomachs of soldiers, showing hypothermia symptoms. Night monitoring was crucial and became part of unit standard operating procedure. Healthy soldiers sacrificed their own rest to ensure compromised personnel stayed warm and combat effective, checking for signs of advanced hypothermia, frostbite progression, or respiratory problems. Special bedding arrangements were constructed specifically for wounded personnel using deeper insulation systems that required more materials but provided better thermal protection. Food and hot drink timing was managed differently, with warm rations and heated liquids prioritized for soldiers showing cold injury symptoms. Heated metal containers made from ration cans and small fires were both simple technology and surprisingly effective medical treatment, like battlefield heated blankets that actually kept soldiers alive and combat ready. Protecting compromised unit members took enormous effort and shared resources that healthy soldiers willingly provided. But all of this careful medical attention could be wasted if unit security failed during the vulnerable nighttime hours when cold made everyone less alert. Maintaining combat effectiveness. Security systems were essential for winter survival because maintaining combat readiness while staying warm required balancing thermal protection with tactical alertness. Cold temperatures made soldiers slower, less alert, and more vulnerable to enemy action during crucial nighttime hours when most attacks occurred. Guard duty rotation served as the primary security system, with scheduling that turned thermal management into tactical advantage. Guard assignments were coordinated to ensure soldiers stayed warm enough to remain combat effective while maintaining 360-degree security around unit positions. Sentries became like human early warning systems that never stopped working, except instead of just watching for enemies, they had to stay alive and alert enough to actually fight back. Guard training for winter operations started during basic training, where soldiers learned to distinguish between approaching threats while managing their own hypothermia symptoms and maintaining weapon readiness. Different alert levels, communication signals, and positioning protocols helped guards understand what kind of threat required immediate response versus routine security checks. A German patrol approaching required different defensive preparations than artillery spotters or single infiltrators trying to probe American lines. Guards became tactical threat assessment specialists who could tell the difference between one big problem with support weapons and multiple smaller problems with automatic rifles and grenades. Weapon maintenance within heated positions followed strict protocols that balanced quick access with protection from moisture and ice that could cause malfunctions during combat. Rifles, machine guns, and equipment were positioned where soldiers could reach them instantly without fumbling in darkness, while ensuring mechanisms stayed functional despite freezing conditions. Position selection included considerations about enemy behavior patterns and likely attack routes. Sites were chosen to avoid areas where German forces were known to probe regularly, while still providing defensive advantages and access to supply routes. American units needed for resupply operations. Physical barriers around positions provided additional protection that did not depend on human alertness or individual fighting skills that deteriorated in extreme cold. Snow and debris were shaped strategically to channel approaching enemies toward areas where they could be detected and engaged more effectively by soldiers soldiers whose combat effectiveness was reduced by cold conditions. Snow fortification was tactical engineering, disguised as winter construction, because sometimes the best defense was making enemies approach through predetermined killing zones, where frozen soldiers could still fight effectively. Response protocols for different combat situations were practiced and understood by every unit member, so everyone knew their role when threats were detected during winter operations. These were not theoretical battle drills. They were tested procedures based on real combat encounters survived through months of winter warfare experience against determined German forces who faced the same cold weather challenges. Every technique worked together as one complete survival system, proving that with enough knowledge, preparation, and unit cooperation, American soldiers could fight and survive anywhere the war took them, from the frozen foxholes of Bastogne to the brutal winter campaigns across Europe. These 7 methods kept entire divisions combat effective through winters that killed as many men as enemy bullets and helped win the war